could threaten the survival of many in the industry. However, for packaging covers as well as the rise of focus on innovation capabilities, the new landscape could offer significant growth and new partnerships opportunities to support the consumers in revising their packaging portfolios. But it's not only about packaging, it's about recycling. Let's talk about how we're going to be moving forward for the next years, how we can convert this reality and how we can embrace sustainability issues as a consumer's demands more proactive and regulatory requirements to apply. Now, I would like to give the microphone to Serdar, who is going to be introducing you to who we are as a chamber and what we offer to our members. Serdar, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Alejandra. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this great webinar in the Environment Alliance. And if you like to see these slides, you can please click on the Restore Presentation icon, bottom right, just beside the hand raise icon. Restore Presentation icon, just beside the hand raise icon, bottom right. We are an NGO, not-for-profit organization established in 2015 with our headquarters in Munich, Germany, and an office in Switzerland. And our core value proposition is exposure, which means networking. We have a very powerful virtual tech platform that we are having our webinar on it today, and internationalization. Our structure, we have 3 different group of sections to be called alliances, regional ones from LATAM to China, and technology ones, including all technology areas, including environment and others, as well horizontal thematic alliances we call impact, finance, SDGs, climate action, and women in tech. About our events, which are based for our impact, including webinars every year, more than 200-300 under all our alliances with global speakers from all around the world. And we will restart doing our expos in hybrid mode, and including virtual expos you can join. And thousands of people register at our events, including mainly company owners and decision and policy makers. You can also take part to contribute as well, get networking, which means the base for all our activities, as we are the number 1 technology network in Europe, and our mission is to be the leading one in the world. Having our speakers and panelists at the first networking meeting right after the webinar, you will be invited by directors and Alejandra for environment, and you will get the opportunity to meet with them and get networking with others who join. As well, at another networking meeting, you will have the opportunity to meet with members about any business collaboration in the future. And of course, we have some funding opportunities to elaborate, not only from Europe, as well globally, like UN, World Bank, and others. So this is also a very good opportunity for those who join our networking events. You can join and get invitation from our directors, Alejandra. And about the ecosystem, we see it as knowledge and networking, and knowledge is the base for networking, and including white papers and position papers and Visions for Europe magazine, which is an online magazine that you can write article, and when it is published, you can share it on your social media platforms like LinkedIn and others to make you more visible. As well, you can contribute to white paper and position paper, and your name and print and picture are published to make you more visible inside the industry. You can also take part in our programs that you can check for details later. And about our technology.forum, this is our virtual platform. You will have your booth, and you can attend virtual expos to promote your business. And also very important to get into networking by using the database we have. This is the opportunity you will have when you join us, hopefully. And of course, engagement and getting benefit of exclusive features. About the partnerships, you can get to our colleague Marcus, and in general, our director membership, Federico. But of course, Alejandra will be the first point of contact if you consider to join us. I wish you all a great webinar and thank you, Alejandra.
Thank you, Seta. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Once again, I would like to encourage you to share your comments, your questions on the public chat that you will find on the left side of your screen, okay? You only need to click and you're gonna be able to write and whatever you would like to share with the panelists or with the audience. Just keep in mind that you can start to do that from this moment. Please don't wait till the end of the webinar. So if you would like to share any comment and question, feel free to do it. Today, we're honored with the presence of 4 great panelists. All of them are experienced professionals with a great vision. You will notice that each one of them has a different background and has a different point of view of what we're going to be talking about today. And I think that actually that is one of the most valuable aspects during today's conversation. Now, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Jennifer Jordison. She's the founder of So Just Shop, an award-winning ethical and sustainable hardware, accessories, and gifting D2C and B2B brand working directly with women-led artisans groups from vulnerable communities and as well from all around the globe. Jennifer has an extensive experience in international development and startup technology. We have both of not-for-profit and for-profit organizations impacts. Throughout her experience, time and again, Jennifer saw firsthand the barriers to the maternal and child health and education were linked to the economic disempowerment. Because of that, is that she is leading different great initiatives that she's going to be providing you more details during her presentation. So Jennifer, the microphone is yours. When you will finish, I will continue with the introduction of the other panelists, okay?
Hi, thank you. Oh yeah, there you go, my screen share's on. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Seda, for the introduction. I'm just going to share my screen with you all now. Okay. Hi, everyone. Can my screen be seen okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Wonderful. Hi, thank you for that great introduction, Maria. Yes, my name's Jennifer. I'm the founder of So Just Shop. In terms of the discussion today, I suppose my aspect is more coming at it as a retailer and the challenges we find, but also how it fits in more generally to how we work as a business. So Just Shop, as Maria said, we work with vulnerable women-led artisan groups from all around the world. We make homeware, accessories, jewelry, all of which we measure the impact of. So as much as possible, we make sure that they are sustainably made, recycled or upcycled. Everybody is paid a living wage. They're working in safe working conditions and there's no forced labor. And that's a really important aspect to what we do. And we track everything we do at every stage. And this also then at the end of the stage, as it were, as it gets to the consumer, includes our packaging and the considerations we make within that packaging. So you can see the detail that we go into. This was our impact last year of the work that we do. So we provided our artisans with 80,000 hours of meaningful labor. Also within that, we break down the environmental impact of what we do, the energy impact, because I sometimes think people just measure carbon, but they don't look at the environmental impact. And I think it's very easy to measure your carbon and then offset it without actually considering the pollution that's going into the rivers and the sea and the damage that's been done to the wider environment around you. So for example, when we, most of our jewelry is made in India and we use recycled precious metal in order to do that. And that's because obviously mining can be very damaging to the environment as well as the chemical impact, particularly when you're looking at gold into the water systems. I'm very aware while I'm giving this talk that there are people that are a lot more expert on this presentation that can be talking in great more detail about packaging. So please excuse me if it's not 100% correct in what I'm saying, but this is the information that I take into consideration when we look at packaging ourselves. So it's a huge challenge. Single-use packaging, from the latest data that I've seen, accounts for about 46% of all packaging. So obviously this is not a good scenario to be in. Large amounts of it can't be recycled in existing systems, although there is potential that it could be recycled. So it's relatively low. In the US, it's particularly bad. In the US, on top of that, is probably the country that produces the largest amount of single-use packaging. In Europe, we seem to be a lot better at it. It's around 40%, but again, it really does depend on the type of plastic packaging that's being recycled and whether we should be even producing plastic packaging that can't be recycled. You can see the difference. So, for example, plastic packaging in the UK is about 40%, but that goes up to 80% when you're looking at paper, and 75 to 80% when you're looking at metal and glass. So these are considerations. For example, with us, we have a retail outlet in central London, and we only use paper bags within that. So I am aware that there are compostable bags that can be used, but my theory on it is that paper bags are the most easy to be recycled. So that's the decision that we took to make there. Global leakage or unmanaged dumps of plastic material flows. I mean, this is, again, it's a huge problem. It's around 90%, and only 16% of all plastic waste is reprocessed to make new plastics. And this is a huge problem because a lot of it goes into incineration, and many of those, including actually in London, we have incinerators based within or close to large populated areas, and obviously there's an issue there in general health and particulate matters. And then in landfill, and then if it goes into landfill, you've got the issue of leaching into the water table as well. So as I talked a bit about the impact that we're having, the particulate matter in the waste, I've spent a lot of time living and working in India, and India, sadly, is host to some of the most polluted cities in the world, and a lot of this is because of the particulate matter that comes from burning a lot of waste, because there just isn't the waste reprocessing available there, or certainly not at the volume that's needed. You've got the toxic runoffs that affect freshwater habitats and our drinking, and obviously the endocrine disruption into the oceans. And this is really affecting the much wider environment. So it's not just affecting human health, but it's also affecting all of the health of the overall planet. Now, there are lots of different solutions about this. I won't go into detail. As I said, this is not my area of expertise, so I won't go into too much detail about with one of our producers in India, when they send us the jewelry that they make, they're now sending it to us in corn-based cellulose packaging, which is brilliant. So because you need to package jewelry in something, otherwise it will get into a knot and a mess, and secondly it will start to tarnish. So it needs to be put in a single piece, as it were, piece by piece, needs to be put in its own packaging. But the corn-based cellulose works really well because, again, that can be biodegradable and it's a really good alternative. And then obviously we need to look at increasing recycling rates, the use of packaging that's more easily recycled, such as paper and aluminium. This is particularly when you're looking into food waste in particular. So I've certainly in the UK now, I'm starting to see more producers of water, or not producers of water, that seems wrong, but more people that are producing bottled water, but not in bottles, in aluminium cans, which is brilliant because aluminium, about 90% of the aluminium ever in existence is still being reused. It's such an easy material to reuse, much more easy, for example, than plastic bottles. Then I think we need to look at, so there's two sides to this. Why is it that single-use plastic is still cheaper to use than than alternatives that can be easily recycled or biodegradable? So there's something in the more global legislative systems that we really need to look at to make sure that me using the corn-based cellulose alternative, for example, in the single packaging for my jewelry, is cheaper than actually using the plastic, single-use plastics that it often comes in. We need to find a way to make that decision for me as a retailer much more simple, because again, it's just piling on the pressure for me. So it's making my costs much higher because I'm doing the right thing, which seems the wrong way around to do it. So again, subsidies for recycled packaging, and then the other flip side, I know it's a conversation that's been happening in the UK, but it's not moved that much, is that retailers need to be made more responsible for recycling their own packaging. So, for example, if supermarkets are producing, 2 apples in a single-use plastic, they should be responsible rather than the consumer or rather than the local authority who's picking up the waste. Those supermarkets should be responsible for recycling their own packaging so they can measure their impact. Now, the problem that is always into play, which takes me back to the second slide that I ever did, is that so many retailers and producers put their hands in the air and they say, our supply chains are too complex, we can't measure them, or we'll only measure the bits that we have total control of, not from raw materials right up until the consumer. So I think one thing that needs to be done, and I think this impacts on all the work in terms of ethical and sustainable and recycling and environmental, we need to understand exactly what the supply chains are, because until we understand what these supply chains are, we can't then put in interventions in order to change them successfully. And I do feel this is where there needs to be a strong legislative message from the countries where you are selling the products, where you are located, in that they can't just be responsible for the short supply chains, they have to be responsible for the whole supply chains of any of the products they work with. And I think that will then enable us to move forward in creating a more accountable system. And once the system is more accountable, we can then make the bigger changes that are needed. So thank you very much for listening to me. These are my contact details. If you have any questions or you want to reach out at all, I really appreciate this opportunity in talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now, I would like to introduce Paul Sanderson. Paul Sanderson is the co-founder of Recycling Insights and has run the Recycling Information Service Rep Market Intelligence since 2012. He has been involved in the recycling media since 2004, when he was appointed editor of Matura's Recycling Week in the UK. Paul is especially interested in using artificial intelligence in the recycling sector, which is being used to produce forecast prices for the Recycling Insights. So, Paul, if you would like to say hello to the audience, the microphone is yours.
Hello, everybody today. Thank you for the presentation, Jennifer, and thank you for inviting me to join the panel, Maria.
Thank you, Paul. I would like to introduce Sebastian. He's the co-founder of Footprint, a digital climate tech and sustainable startup. Further, he is the host of Design Drives podcast, where he interviews global design leaders on the impact of design. For the last 5 years, he designed the future mobility experience by BMW Group as a design lead of the rear seat passenger and mobile app experience. He gained many international design recognitions and had the chance to be invited to speak at conferences all around the globe regarding design and as well innovation. Sebastian, if you would like to say hello to the audience, this is the moment.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Looking forward to the discussion, and thank you for a nice presentation, Jennifer.
Thank you, Sebastian. Now, last but not least, I would like to introduce Rahaf Mahenswari. I'm so sorry if I don't pronounce well your name. Rahaf is the co-founder and the director of the Origin Biopack. He wants to promote circular economy and bring positive changes to the environment through the enabling sustainable packaging in all industries. Previous a startup was founded by the government of Delhi and applauded by the countrywide. Rahab holds expertise in product design, manufacturing, and constant deep dive to understand new sustainable materials. With several years of experience in packaging industry, Rahab has seen a kick shift from plastic packaging to the transitions into sustainable modes and proudly leads these missions at origin. Rahab, if you would like to say hello to the audience, the microphone is yours.
Hi all. Thank you, Maria, for giving the platform and a very insightful presentation, Jennifer. Thank you for that.
Thank
Looking
you so
forward.
much. So after this amazing brief introduction from our panelists, let's start the panel. And the first question for all of you will be, what are the main challenges for recycling and sustainable packaging, in your opinion? Who would
Would I
like to
start,
start?
Maria?
Yes, Paul, please.
I think the main challenges are to, as Jennifer pointed out, we have very low recycling rates globally for plastics, and plastics are just the largest pollutant generally that we find when it's not treated properly. I think we've got to find ways to rapidly increase the recycling of plastics, and that is increasingly happening. So in the UK, we have a plastic packaging tax that was introduced in April. In the European Union, there's measures have been introduced that will put an 80-cent charge on each ton of plastics, each kilogram of plastics, which has been implemented differently in each nation. And so that sort of measure is helping to ensure that the people who manufacture and sell the plastic packaging in the first place are those who are responsible for recycling it and for using more recycled content. But I think we also need to focus on the circular economy and the waste hierarchy, and we've got to also find solutions to introduce more reuse. So not just recycling. Recycling is very important, will always be important, but we have to look at how we reuse as well, but also reduce. We've got to reduce the amount of waste that we create in the first place and find solutions to do that.
Thank you, Paul. Who would like to go next?
So if I see another challenge is optimizing the material for other industries, because the sustainable material has to perform equally well as compared with the unsustainable materials. So doing the proper coatings on top of paper, giving the right strength, giving the right tensile strength, burst factor. So everything has to be considered, and that has been a challenge for making a switch.
Thank you, Rahab. Sebastian, let's think more about the sustainable solution side. What do you think that will be the main challenges?
Yeah, I think like what's interesting also, just to add on maybe what has been already said, another thing to think about is that it requires a different way of thinking. Yeah, so I think companies are used to come up with solutions themselves or find solutions for the use case, but in terms of sustainability and recycling, especially, you have to really, and if we want to talk about circular economy, you have to think about the whole process. Now you not just start with basically like the relationship basically between that is happening on the purchase, but you actually look at the whole journey that actually your material is going to. And this is a different type of thinking where you really need to have a system thinking, yeah. And it requires collaboration by default, usually, right? While I think in the past, or basically, if you're not thinking about circular economy, you not necessarily need collaboration. In this case, you definitely need collaboration because you're just one part of a system, yeah. So you really need to have a system thinking approach, and this also shifts just in terms of the mindset how companies are working. And I think this is another thing to think about. And I think it's kind of interesting, like if we're looking at sort of like the history of packaging also, that if we're looking at very far back, it used to be something that actually the company owned, right? So then I think it has been historically moving to the customer, right? So the customer is now owning the waste, right? If you purchase something, right, he basically gets the packaging, right, and then he actually buys something that he doesn't or she doesn't want. and has to get rid of it. But it used to be different, right? And if we're thinking about waste as an asset, and how is that asset being basically carried over on the overall journey, I think that's something to consider. I think, and that's a different mindset for companies to adapt.
Can I just add to that, Maria?
Yes, please.
I think Sebastian's point there is really important. So I think, you know, traditionally it was considered a waste that was collected maybe by a local authority and disposed of in a landfill or maybe an incinerator. But we've got to even move away from treating it as a waste and treat it as a resource, a secondary commodity. And, you know, that also means that we've got to be aware that this is something that needs global trade to be effective. You know, if you're in Europe, in the US, in Australia, Japan, we don't tend to be major manufacturing centers. Maybe some areas we are, but we don't tend to be as much as we used to be. And so we have to return those commodities back to where they will be remanufactured into new products. So, you know, if you take, for example, the cardboard boxes that cover our TVs when we buy them, we don't manufacture TVs really in Europe anymore. We've got to ensure that that raw material goes back to the place of remanufacture so that it can be turned back into a cardboard box over there to cover our products again.
Thank you, Paul. There is something that actually I would like to ask you regarding something that Sebastian mentioned before. You were saying converting waste into an asset. I would like to ask you how to design for circular solutions, something that will focus in recycle and will reduce the waste. Difficult question.
So I start again. I think Jennifer made the point that we've got to make products as simple and easy to recycle as possible. And, you know, typically my experience in the recycling sector is that companies that recycle want single materials. So, you know, they want cardboard boxes, they want single PET bottles or aluminium cans. What they find harder to recycle are multi-material products like pouches and beverage cartons. So certainly, again, in the UK and Europe, measures are being introduced to encourage the manufacture of single material packaging, which makes the recyclability of them much easier.
Thank you, Paul. Jennifer, you wanted to say something?
Well, I was going to say something. It's like, I mean, it's not packaging, but it's a nice example of recycling and reuse, and it's one of my favorites. So we work with a community in Delhi called Green the Map. Raghav, I'm sure you've heard of them. They do a lot of reforestry, building small forests in Delhi, but they also work very closely with rubbish pickers. And one of the products that we buy from them are upcycled tire bags and card holders and things like that. And this, my background's public health. So, you know, malaria and dengue fever, waste tires being left on the street are a huge breeding ground for mosquitoes, and they tend to particularly be left in poorer areas that have little infrastructure involved. So it's like a double layer of, you know, you're more likely to catch malaria and dengue fever if you're living in a poorer area. You're less likely to be able to access healthcare. You don't have finance to do it. So one of the things that we do with Green the Map is they collect a lot of these tires. So taking them off the street is massively impactful in terms of public health, but also then, because tires take about 90 years to break down, so recycling them into the bags that we then sell is a lovely way of integrating that whole circular economy. And we're doing it at quite a small scale, but you can imagine that a number of projects like this scaled up can have a massive impact on so many different levels of society.
Thank you, Jennifer. Rahel and Sebastian, if you would like to add anything else? Or should I
So I
go
think
with please?
another challenge, now we are talking about the challenges. So another challenge is the customer awareness. So making the customer aware, the brands aware about the cost that the sustainable packaging material is uh, as compared to the plastic materials. It is somewhat comparable in the costs. And when we talk of the material efficiency, then when the material leaves the warehouse and reaches the customer, so there is no tampering or damaging of the product, because the kind of value the products hold is quite higher than the packaging materials themselves. So the customer education cycle has to be reduced if we want to have a greater impact or an impact at scale.
Thank you.
Maybe just
Now,
yeah. Adding
please.
on top of that, if we're talking about challenges, I think totally right what Josh just said about the customer side, because the customer also doesn't very often has a hard time to deal with all the different labels that are in place. There's really like a sort of like missing transparency, and you know, I think like making sure it doesn't come across as greenwashing. I think that's an important part. I think. And that's a challenge that companies are facing, because what we see also with customers, they're constantly also sort of challenging what they also see and what has been communicated to them and how true this is. So there's been generally uncertainty, I think, also from a customer side, as much as it is, I think, overall is appreciated. The other thing I think is the employee side. So this is where we work a lot, and so what we see also internally in the company, one of the roadblockers and challenges is the education part. Yeah? So very often people in the company, they are not even aware around, if it's not a company that has been founding on the principles of sustainability at the very beginning, very often employees are overwhelmed to understand the impact they can make in that context. And very often you see companies doing something sustainable, and it's very often a top-down initiative in the very beginning, I think, which is important. But then what's challenges that we learn from sustainability managers and ESG managers working in companies is that want to try to make a difference, including when it comes to packaging and sort of the circular economy, is that they, of course, they are a department, but actually sustainability is not a department, but sustainability is a company mindset. And that's sort of like, a shift you may have an engineering team, but it's basically something, like sustainability is there's a team of experts, but at the same time, it's a company effort, because now if I want to basically re-engineer the packaging, I'm the sustainability manager, but I need the other people to do something in order to move this forward, because there are a lot of vertical expertise that are needed in order to make a difference. So basically, it's about that internal collaboration. And now one of the big problems is that maybe internally, if you, let's say, the sustainability manager or has a different sort of KPIs and different sort of like goals than maybe the person in charge of the engineering of the packaging at the very beginning, because they may be focusing on safety and like costs and so on. So that's when you kind of have to convince other people in the company to go the extra mile for you. And what we learned is it's very important to visualize what the impact is going to be, make that transparent to them, and sort of like have that internal education and awareness about the impact everyone can make, because that's very often not very known even. So yeah.
Thank you, Sebastian. You're bringing up regarding the employees, and indeed regarding the previous question in which I was asking you how to design those circular solutions for make easier recycling and reduce the waste. I would like to ask you, what is the role of the customer and the employee in all of this?
Yeah. So I think, like, again, it's like both as the customer and the employee. I think what has been seen on the customer side is that, of course, like there's incredible sort of need coming to the market. One statistics, for example, if we compare like 2 years ago, now 22% of customers basically say that environmental responsibility is very or even extremely important when deciding for a brand in their purchasing decisions. There have been many more statistics. We have been doing a lot of research there and collecting all kind of research in terms of customer behavior, and like it's getting more and more important for customers when making decisions. And I think so that's definitely, I think from the customer side, there's definitely that push. And then of course, like a lot of times, like companies now have to do that additional investment now, and if they really believe in that customer need, right, to really leveraging also on that and make their investments in terms of their packaging and making this more sustainable. And then, as mentioned, the employee side, I was already touching on that, but I think what's important there also is that you like, I think one of the challenges there is in companies that there is this top-down approach, which is the very important part, but there also needs that kind of common belief within their companies. Now we talk specifically, of course, like larger companies here, but that believe that they can actually what they can do, and instead of basically with innovation in general, it's good that you not just basically you have people sort of participating in that process, right? Instead of just basically. So what's important is to set goals and make that transparent within the company. Then also there has to be a process in terms of decision making. The biggest impact you can make is on the brief. So basically, what are your requirements for your next packaging or your next product that you are developing? And the product brief and the product requirement list, that's where you make the biggest impact, because and then the second part is like, how do you make the decisions that are along the process? Because a major part of that is happening in the design phase, right? Mm-hmm. So how are we designing this actually in the first place? And very often, if you decide purely based on the cost, then you may not end up with the most sustainable option very often. So that's why the customer side is then critical. But it's important then to basically have employees and have people kind of have say in the process, and have that culture change as well.
Thank you, Sebastian. Jennifer, Paul, Rahaf, if you would like to add anything to what Sebastian was saying.
I think one of the things I would say, which I've been hearing quite a lot in conversations I've been having with business owners, is actually how much pressure is coming from within, from the employees themselves, and also recruiting. So there's an awful lot now of potential employees, when they're going through the recruitment process, is they are holding companies to account and saying, we only want to work with companies whose brands align with a more environmentally aware vision of the world, whose brands align with climate change and climate change mitigation. So I think that in itself is also putting pressure on a lot of companies to act. But again, in a similar way to with carbon emissions, right? Is it 4 companies? 100 companies are responsible for 71% of the emissions. In single-use plastic, you've got, I think there's 4 companies responsible for nearly 20%. So again, there's a lot of consumer pressure that can be brought, and is being brought, on a lot of companies in order to make those changes. They are being held to account a lot more. Possibly, it needs to be speeded up. Definitely, it needs to be speeded up. But it's happening at a rate it's never happened before, which I think is a really good sign.
I think from the consumer point of view, when I was a kid, we had one bin that all of the waste went into, and consumers have been amazing in that they have changed their habits to recycle a lot more, but we've got to encourage them to do even better. And I think the way we have to do that is to make it as simple as possible. I think people have got enough worries, with rising energy prices, et cetera, normal things that we experience in our lives. And so we've got to introduce measures that make it really, really simple to recycle. So one thing that we're doing in the UK in the next few years, which I think is going to be really amazing, is that when you buy something, the packaging will tell you which bin it needs to go into. So if you buy, say, a PET bottle drink, that packaging will tell you which bin it needs to go into to be collected, and then that people can just look at it. It's really simple. They put it in the correct container and it gets easily recycled. It reduces contamination. I think we've got to introduce more measures like that where it's really, really, really simple to recycle, and then people can just, do it without too much thought.
So Sebastian said something about the top to bottom approach. I'd very well agree with that. So talking about a company at scale like Amazon in India, so all their e-commerce parcels, whether it is poly mailer, it has been completely replaced by craft paper mailers. The plastic tapes have been completely replaced by paper tapes. The bubble wrap has been completely replaced by shredded paper fillers. So it has been, the challenge or the trend has been that if a company like Amazon is making the change, it paves the path for all the smaller companies. So the burden basically lies on the shoulder of these bigger e-commerce giants, along with the government policies that are being laid down by the Indian government, or let's say the European government. The burden definitely lays down on these bigger e-commerce players. So in India, we have Flipkart, Myntra, Walmart, Amazon. So when these companies tend to make a change in their packaging designs, because they have the most resources, where they can spend on the R&Ds, where they can spend on the supply chains, where they can spend on the procurement of the raw materials. They start to make a change, it basically paves a path for the smaller D2C brands or the smaller e-commerce companies.
Thank you. Now, my question is more about the companies. How companies can foster innovation to become more sustainable? And how does innovation differ to the traditional innovation?
Yeah, I can maybe touch on that. I mean, I partly have been, I think, like already touching on it, but I think again, I think like the really like a big impact is thinking, have that system thinking, and then I think what's also important is create internal incentives for actually becoming more sustainable. Because as mentioned, like what's the decision process that you have when you design your next product or next packaging, right? So how do you basically incentivize internally that you decide on sustainability being an important metric. The other part is that it requires maybe a more it really requires like a data-driven approach. So you really need a lot of data. Like a lot of companies struggle with this because okay, how can you actually make now a data-driven decision in terms of like what the impact is actually going to be for making that, considering everything. Companies struggle to calculate that, and like having basically an understanding like what that impact is going to be. So that is obviously a bigger effort. The other part is that like transparency. So basically, how do you make as mentioned, sustainability is really like a team effort across the company that needs that interdisciplinary collaboration. So how do you make that transparent as well when it comes to the process? Because again, it's easier to it's important in the company to have that transparency. Very often internally in your companies, people are even not aware what a company is actually doing in that context. So what is actually happening to make the company more sustainable. And while I think like maybe when you think about traditional innovation, it can be often like a key differentiator on the market, right? So maybe companies are purchasing this product, but like with sustainability, it has to sort of like, it's not so much that has to happen in a lab that nobody can watch. Basically, with sustainability, you need that broader collaboration, even outside of the company. You need to speak to others right away. It's not that sort of like maybe more traditional innovation where you can like technical innovation that you can do in a lab with just a certain amount of people knowing about it. With sustainability and like specifically like circularity, you have to make that an open process, right? It's an open innovation process where you speak to partners right away. You focus on a collaboration instead of the confidentiality of like what are you doing. So fostering that transparency, I think it's also important here. Yeah.
Thank you, Sebastian. What do you think, Jennifer, Paul, and Rahab?
Well, so you hear quite often, this is conversations that I obviously have quite often with people, and you hear quite often the larger companies, they talk about complexities and this and that and the other, and smaller companies will say, well, we can't afford to do it. And my answer to that is slight disbelief. I think if there is a decision that is taken that this is how we are going to run as a business, then, as Sebastian was saying earlier, at every point in the decision-making process, that is a part of the decision. So whilst I'm aware we are not perfect, we are pretty close. I think last year we had 94% of our products were recycled or upcycled materials. And it's just a decision that's taken at the core of everything we do. So we look at every single aspect of it. We calculate, if we use different types of materials, what is the carbon impact of that? Which are better carbon sinks? How do we do? So we just did a project. We supplied a major British supermarket with some promotional tote bags, and the point in which they approached us and said, would we be happy to do this? My response was, only if we use 100% recycled cotton, or we're not doing it, because the amount of water pollution, the amount of waste that's generated, those are the decisions that we take. So we'll pitch for you, but only if this is something that you're bought into. If not, it would be, work with someone else. And I think those are the decisions that need to be taken as a business, and that has to be inherent in every single aspect of it, from the product design to the CEO at the top, and also again that impact, making them accountable, sharing that accountability, and I think that's the only way it can be done, and it's the only way it should be done.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do you want to add anything else to this point? Paul,
I think I'd just add to what Jennifer was just saying, that this is a very difficult process for a lot of companies. Raghav mentions Amazon introducing a lot more cardboard to replace plastic, and obviously Amazon have huge resources. For smaller companies, it's a very complex process. And if you take liquids, for example, it seems like glass is a very sustainable material, and it is. But the problem with glass is that it's heavy. So you have, additional transport costs, more fuel use, and more breakage as well. And then suddenly, particularly if you're looking at, say, cleaning chemicals, plastics makes a lot more sense. It's less likely that children are able to get into plastics. But then, it's all of these difficult decisions that have to be made. And I think there needs to be better tools out there to help particular smaller manufacturers and retailers to fully understand the sustainability of their products and the packaging that they use, not just from a recycling point of view, but the entire sustainability of the packaging and the product.
Yeah, to add to this, I think that there needs to be metrics for all the departments in the companies. So let's say there is a procurement department. So there should be metrics for that, whether the material is sourced from an FSC compliant forest, whether the material is coming from a sustainable forest that is managed sustainably. Going to the design department, whether they're following the right design principles while designing the products. Going to the manufacturing department, whether they're using the right chemicals, they're using the right water-based inks. So I think there have to be metrics for each department in the company, so that in the totality, or having a 360 approach, they're somewhere close to reaching the sustainability goals.
I would like to ask you, do you think that technology is the key for sustainability?
Yes.
Definitely. So we see platforms like Plan A. They're helping companies map their carbon footprints, their employee carbon footprints, their manufacturing carbon footprints. And that can only be done by having the right technology. So technology plays a huge role.
I think Sebastian mentioned earlier about the need for collaboration. And, traditionally, these are sectors that haven't collaborated, whether it's local authorities, whether it's retailers, manufacturers, the environmental services sector. And we need technology to enable them to collaborate. And that could simply be through tracking material to understand where the material is as part of the circular economy, so that we have a greater understanding not just of where the material is, but the quality of that secondary material as well, so that people have a full understanding of what they're buying, what they're selling, where it's going, the sustainability metrics around that. So, I think technology is essential. And also, we're seeing artificial intelligence used in lots of ways, whether that's through identification of material or in what I do through forecasting of prices. And I think artificial intelligence in particular has the capacity to really aid the circular economy to become efficient and operationally successful.
What do you think, Jennifer?
I mean, definitely for me, everything's all about having that complete transparent supply chain. And I don't think that you can have that without some form of technological. I mean, at the moment, I spend my days, and my background is epidemiology, statistics, so I quite love a bit of data, but I do spend an awful lot of my days trying to weigh up decisions of what materials we use versus the impact it has in all the different measures. So, for example, is bamboo a more sustainable material than jute? On the front end of it, they both are really good carbon sinks and really fast growing materials, but and they both need watering, so those are all good indicators. But bamboo needs a lot of chemical input in order to process it into a fabric. So it's no decision tends to be a yes, no, and you have to work out what are the priorities for you as a business or the community that you're working within, and how does that play out across the whole of the supply chain? Can you then go back and amend any issues that happened earlier on? For example, could you go and clean the water up if that's the only choice that you're making? And being able to have that complete transparency is really useful, but I don't think you can have it without a really strong, probably internationally agreed technological backbone that everyone can plug into, so everyone's working at the same level playing field on this and having the same level of understanding.
Thank you, Jennifer. Sebastian, any final thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say, like, is technology like the answer? I would say to everything that was said, like totally yes, but at the same time also no, right? Because of course, like, there are more parts to it, regulations, etc. Everything that Jennifer has been saying, right? Not necessarily technology aspects, like the willingness to change, political aspects, etc. Right? So yeah, there are more things. Is technology playing a key role in terms of enabling that? Yes. So basically, abilities to track the data, to have that collaboration, like Paul was saying. Basically, yes and no. But technology is playing a key role, enabling all of the different aspects as well that are important to make that happen.
Thank you, Sebastian. Now, we have one question from the audience. I'm going to ask you that question, but before that, I would like to ask you, what would be that advice that you will give to all those entrepreneurs and business owners that are trying to innovate with sustainable packaging and recycling? Briefly, what would be that advice? Who would like to start?
I'll start. I think coming from the space, I think get on the ground, start your studies from the very zero level, which is studying the raw materials. And if you have 5 different raw materials, then you need to study which particular raw material can be scaled, create products which are currently being made by single-use plastics and can be made with alternate materials. That can be a good way to start.
I would say basically maybe on top of that, I think don't underestimate what is little change can do. So I think one of the problems is also, especially when I speak to a lot of designers working in the packaging industry, for example, but also ecopreneurs, basically with smaller businesses. Like even thinking about like a smaller change that might feel like it's like you're doing a lot of effort here, but you it's just like a little bit. But yes, that really matters as well. So basically, you multiply always. Because if you think about packaging, it's a small change can multiply a lot, right? So basically, if you find like a small change in something that can, because you're gonna have that product in like that packaging being used a lot. So basically, don't underestimate what a little change can do, even though maybe the number feels very small. The way it's going to multiply to the usage is going to make a big impact, and you don't know what how it's going to grow in the future. And I think it's important also to celebrate that, because making something more it's often like you have an MVP process, right? So you get something, you make the first step. Celebrate that first step that you're doing, then think about like how can you make the next ideation on top of it, and instead of getting overwhelmed with like basically work towards that final goal, but also understand this maybe requires multiple steps towards that, and also celebrate the small steps in the process of making your product and packaging more sustainable.
Thank you, Sebastian. Paul and Jennifer.
I think it's important, as Sebastian said earlier, to collaborate and go and find people to talk to. I think the recycling sector is keen to talk to manufacturers, and manufacturers are keen to talk to the recycling sector and retailers and local authorities. I think it's important to collaborate and understand the needs of each part of the supply chain. And we've certainly seen in the UK, for example, a major cereal manufacturer has spoken to the recycling sector about its needs and has redesigned products as a result that work for every part of the chain. So I think, go out there and find people and talk to them.
So I'd probably say you need to actually properly take account of your whole supply chain. First of all, I think that's really important, as much as you can. And then the second point would be embed it within the ethos of your whole company and understand that will have an impact. It will have a cost impact. It will be initially quite challenging, but you need to be open to that. And whether it's right or wrong that it should cost more, there's a reality there that it will. And I think it's important that is understood and accepted, because there's a bigger cost involved, and that's for the whole planet as a whole. So that I think that's where you need to have the mindset.
Jennifer. Now, let's start with this question that is for Paul. What are your thoughts on the fact that the PPT also applies to food contact plastics that don't currently have recycled alternative? With the current cost of living increases, is this not an unnecessary additional cost to the product? It's just for Paul.
Yeah, so the PPT is the plastics packaging tax. So yeah, it's true that there isn't currently an alternative to food contact plastics. We're increasingly seeing the rollout of chemical or advanced recycling plants, which are more likely to be able to allow for recycled plastic content that is food grade. Of course, those plants aren't yet proven, and they're potentially a long way down the line. But I think that's the best option at the moment. In terms of the additional costs and whether the plastics packaging tax is working, it's hard to say. It was only introduced in April, and we've had record high prices for recycled plastics recently. Plastic prices started to come down, but there have been some rumours and some evidence that these high prices have led to some manufacturers going back to virgin material because it's actually worked out cheaper. Longer term, I think the plastics packaging tax is a good idea. It just so happens to be launched during a time when global prices of almost all raw materials were increasing, including recycled plastics in particular, when there was very strong demand for it. So I think it is early days, like you say in the question, but longer term, I suspect it will make a big difference to encourage more use of recycled content.
Thank you, Paul. So with this, we are actually arriving at to the end of this webinar. I know that we have different topics to continue this conversation, very relevant aspects to take into consideration. But of course, we are not able to do that just in 1 hour. So I would like to encourage everyone from the audience to get in touch with the panelists. They will be happy to understand how you can join forces, how you can collaborate. So feel free to reach them. Otherwise, you can tell me and I will be happy to do the match. This will not be just one-time talk. I hope that we will be having these spaces in the future, not only regarding waste, but as well getting deeper into what it is to be sustainable and apply, of course, an environmental perspective to different industries and sectors. So thank you so much for everyone for being here. Before saying goodbye, I just would like to close with a special gift that we have for all the panelists. So if you can confirm, if you can see my screen, please let me know. Can you see it? Can you see my screen?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for my tree.
So to thank you for your participation, we would like to plant a tree in each of your names. So 1 tree for Jennifer, another tree for Paul, another tree for Rahaf, and another tree for Sebastian. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Remember that the doors are always open. So I'm really looking forward to share this kind of stage with you, not only online, but as well one day in person. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for meeting everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.